Gacha games have a pretty big problem, and that problem is secrets. Now, secrets by themselves aren't good or bad, they're just tools, and like any tools, it depends on how you use them. In any medium, whether it's video games, anime, or even books, secrets can add depth, mystery, and excitement. When done right, they can take a story to the next level. Take anime for example. One of the most iconic secrets was Madara's true identity in Naruto. That reveal didn't just shock fans, it elevated the entire story. Another one, Shisui turning out to be Lolan in Apothecary Diaries. I did not see that coming, and it instantly made the whole series more memorable for me. But when it comes to gacha games, secrets don't just hit the same. In fact, I say they often become a part of the problem. You see, the problem with gacha games is that they tend to forget their own secrets. They plan these intriguing mysteries and then they just leave them hanging. Take Genshin Impact for example. They're about to release an entire region that's supposedly meant to uncover major secrets. Secrets I honestly believe they themselves forgot about over the past 5 years. But don't worry, this is not a Genshin rant. Let's talk about another game that's building its own library of mysteries, Wuthering Waves. Despite only being around for about a year, this game is already packed with secrets, from character backstories to world lore and hidden hints. But here's the real question. How well has Wuthering Waves handled its secrets so far? Have they stayed consistent? Are there mystery they've dropped or forgotten about already? That's what we're diving into in this video. So if you're into this kind of content, make sure to like the video and share your thoughts in the comments. Do you think Wuthering Waves has handled its secrets well or not so much? Let me know below. And of course, don't forget to like and subscribe and hit notifications to turn on any of my future videos. Also, I have a Twitter with far too little followers. So if you want to interact with the person behind this channel, make sure to follow me on Twitter. Alright, let's get into it. So in this video, we're going to focus on two main things. First, the secrets themselves. And second, and honestly more importantly, how Wuthering Waves chooses to handle these secrets. Because here's the thing, I don't necessarily have a problem with secrets not being revealed right away. Most gacha games eventually do reveal them, that's not the issue. The problem is when they reveal them. Usually, by the time a gacha game finally gets around to teasing or revealing one of its major secrets, I've already stopped caring. The moment when I was actually invested, when I wanted to know, that's when they told me absolutely nothing, and by the time they decide to drop the bombshell, I've already moved on. So, does Wuthering Waves fall into that same trap? Do they hold on to secrets for so long that they lose all impact, or do they actually handle them differently, in a way that keeps players engaged and curious? Let's find out, starting with the first secret, which, okay, it's not exactly a secret, but it does carry that mysterious weight. Let's talk about the Dark Tide. You see, the Dark Tide is a wave 1 phenomenon unique to Renacita, kind of like how the Lament is tied to Huanglong. It's this massive catastrophic event that unleashes tacit discords across Renacita, creating dangerous tacit fields. So basically, it's one of the most devastating, if not the single most devastating events in the entirety of Renacita. But here's where it gets interesting. The Dark Tide raises a lot of questions. For example, how exactly is a Dark Tide formed? The common belief is that it is caused by a separation of divinity into warring factions. But the source of that theory is the Order, and if there's anything we've learned about the Order, is that they manipulate the truth to fit their own agenda. So if they're the ones feeding us this explanation, the chances are we cannot really trust it. So at the end of the day, we still don't know how a Dark Tide actually forms, and that mystery is still hanging in the air. And from all that comes an even bigger question, one that goes by the name Leviathan. Now, contrary to what you might think, even though the Sentinels and the Threnodians are supposed to be opposites, the Sentinels don't actually know much about the Threnodian at all. In fact, the only reason Imperator fused with Leviathan in the first place, as stated in the story, was to gain more insight into what Leviathan really is. And from that fusion, Imperator learned something huge. Leviathan cannot be destroyed as long as civilization exists. That alone is wild. Props to Kurr for dropping something that heavy. But then it gets even more complicated. We also know that the Threnodian's goal is to engulf Renacita in the Dark Tide. So why? If it can't be destroyed unless civilization falls, that means civilization somehow created or enabled the Threnodian to begin with. Which raises the next question. If the Threnodian wants civilization to be swallowed by the Dark Tide, is that its own desire, or is it just reflecting something buried deep within civilization itself? These are the kinds of questions that stem up from the existence of the Dark Tide. So now we arrive at the real mystery. How does Wuthering Waves so far answer the question of the Dark Tide? How does it handle it and all the narrative weight that has been attached to it since Renacita's introduction? Starting from Wuthering Waves version 2.0 and going into 2.2, that's when the game first started to introduce the idea of the Dark Tide, and honestly, I think they kind of fumbled the introduction. They made a mistake that a lot of gacha games make, especially when they're dealing with huge world-shifting information. They told us everything, but didn't show us anything. We got all this lore about how the Dark Tide supposedly forms, the destruction it causes, and the history behind it. But that was all in dialogue and exposition. There was no actual moment where we saw the Dark Tide in action. No flashback, no visual representation representation, nothing that really let the scale of the event sink in. Even when we reached version 2.2 and we learned that the Avenolium was used to seal the Threnodian during the times of the Dark Tide, even when we could see that the place still bears the scars of that era, it still wasn't enough. Because yeah, we saw traces of the Dark Tide, the aftermath, but we were never shown the Dark Tide itself. Not its form, not the chaos it caused across Renacita, nothing that made it feel real in that moment. But that rocky introduction, that was just the beginning, because moving forward, Wuthering Waves really made sure that we couldn't get enough of the Dark Tide, and I genuinely appreciate that. We got our first glimpse of the Dark Tide in Chacona's trailer. We saw the Dark Tide from the perspective of those who actually fought in it, their motivations, their trauma, what they endured, and that already started giving the Dark Tide real weight. But where things really clicked was during the Wuthering Waves cinematic trailer, The Dawn Arrives. That was the first video we got centered around Cartothea, and it absolutely delivered. For the first time, we saw the destruction the Dark Tide can cause. And it was all told through this stunning cinematic. It wasn't just told to us, it was shown, and it was beautiful and terrifying all at once. Even now in version 2.4, as the story continues, the entire Cartothea arc plays out in a Septimon that's already been overrun by the Dark Tide. And seeing that corruption firsthand, that is awesome. And it doesn't stop there. The next zone we're unlocking in Septimon is called the Hunting Ground, a place that's already consumed by the Dark Tide. That means we're about to dive even deeper. We'll get more lore, more visual storytelling, and something even called the Blight Clouds, which already sounds like it's going to expand the Dark Tide's presence even further. So honestly, I'm really excited for what's next. It finally feels like Wuthering Waves isn't just teasing secrets, they're actually pulling back the curtains and letting us experience them. So yeah, Wuthering Waves has done a pretty solid job, not just in revealing what the Dark Tide is, but also in maintaining the hype. They've kept us curious, kept us asking questions, and more importantly, made us want to know more. That's the mark of a well-handled secret. So in terms of how they've managed the Dark Tide, I'd say it's been a pretty great reveal overall. Now let's shift to another secret, one that is a bit more complex. Let's talk about Abby. And unlike the Dark Tide, Wuthering Waves has taken a very different approach with her. So who or what exactly is Abby? Well, the short answer is we don't know. And I'm not even joking, we really don't. I mean, yeah, it seems clear that Abby is an echo, but even then, there is still uncertainty. Is she actually an echo, or is she something else entirely that happens to look like one? Now, let's break down what we do know. Abby first appeared when the Rover fought the Dreamless, and the very first thing we saw her do, she devoured the entire Dreamless. So instantly, that alone tells us Abby is insanely powerful, far beyond your average echo. We also know that since the very beginning, the Rover has had a tacit mark on their hand. And when we first saw Abby, she didn't just show up out of nowhere, she emerged from that mark, which means one very important thing. Abby has likely been with the Rover long before we even started playing the game, possibly since the time the Rover even had their full memories. That alone makes her existence deeply tied to the core mystery of the story. So if the Rover is this ancient, mysterious, possibly otherworldly figure, then it's pretty safe to say that Abby shares the same level of age and power. She's not just strong, she might be foundational to everything that's going on in Wuthering Waves. But here's the thing, the way Wuthering Waves has chosen to write Abby is kind of odd. You see, she doesn't exist because of the story, she exists in spite of it. You can remove every single one of Abby's line from the game and honestly, nothing would change. Even though the game keeps telling us that Abby is important, it doesn't show us that importance. She's never put in situations where her presence really matters or where her role shines in any meaningful way. Take Renacita for example. The whole reason we even went there in the first place was because of Abby. She was getting weaker, her frequency was fading, and we went searching for Imperator specifically to understand what was happening to her, and hopefully to save her. But somewhere along the way, the game just shifted focus. Suddenly, the story wasn't about Abby anymore, it was about Cartothea, Imperator, the Threnodian, Cantarella. And don't get me wrong, that story is great, but Abby got completely sidelined. The plot went from we need to save Abby to here is a huge geopolitical and existential crisis, and Abby just vanished from the center of it all. So even if there is a part of the story that confirms that Imperator actually helped Abby, if she has been cured in any way, the game has done a poor job in showing us that. We don't know how it happened, what impact it had, or how it ties to everything else going on. It's like Abby is supposed to matter, but the game hasn't given us any reason to believe she actually does. Even now in Septimons, the game has made a very deliberate choice. You see, Abby only shows up after the entire story is over. The only time we see her in this arc is once everything else has already been resolved. And maybe there's a reason for that. Maybe the game is saving her for something huge down the line. But right now, Abby is one of those secrets I'm starting to lose interest in. She's supposed to be this incredible, powerful, mysterious figure, but the game refuses to give her that spotlight. It's like she's just being shelved, only to be brought out when the plot needs a quick nudge forward, and that is frustrating. Right now, Abby doesn't feel essential. She doesn't do anything, and honestly, I really hope Kuro changes that going forward, because so far, the way they've treated the secrets of Abby has been weak. In fact, the only thing that truly stands out about Abby is her voice actor, and credits where credits due, they do an amazing job bringing that character to life. The tone, the delivery, the emotion, it's all on point. But outside of that, Abby's character has been disappointing, and I'm honestly starting to get bored of everything surrounding her. Alright, so the next secret isn't deep enough to be a full-on mystery, it's more of a curiosity, but still, it's really important to ask. Why are we not talking about the fact that Scar has been freed? Yes, I get it, it's great to see Scar back, I was just as hyped as everyone else. But let's not forget, the last time we saw Scar, he was imprisoned in Jingzhou. So again, why isn't anyone in the game talking about this? Now, the how is actually pretty straightforward. We know that he was freed by the Phraxodus, most likely Cristoforo. That's clear enough. But the lack of conversation around it is what's strange. Why aren't we having follow-up moments with characters in Jingzhou? Even just some optional dialogue, a scene, a mention, something. It really feels like the game is dangerously close to just yada yadaing past the whole thing. Like, yeah, Scar is back, just go with it. But no, this was a big deal, and Jingzhou, of all places, should be reacting. We should be hearing the fallout. How did they let this happen? What was Cristoforo's plan? Why was nobody guarding Scar? I'm really hoping that in the next version we get some actual closure on this, or at the very least a sense that the story remembers the weight of what just happened. Now, to be fair, this just happened, so I can give Wuthering Waves a little more time, but he definitely needs to follow through. Another big secret in Wuthering Waves is this. What exactly is the Phraxodus trying to do? What is their goal? You see, a few days ago, I made a video about Rover, and how Wuthering Waves could still make her a playable character, even though she is part of the Phraxodus. And in that video, I touched on something that I still believe. The Phraxodus, as we've seen them so far, comes across as evil. There's been very little nuance to their actions. They haven't done anything that feels morally grey or open to interpretation. Everything they have done has flat out been bad. No layers, no deeper meaning, just destruction and chaos. But here's where things get interesting. Because in the comments on that video, a lot of people disagreed. They said the Phraxodus isn't evil, they're just trying to do good in their own way. That maybe they see themselves as saving the world or restoring balance or something bigger than what we've seen so far. And that raises a real question. What is the Phraxodus' actual goal? Is there more to them than what we have been told, or are they really just these big bad villains of the story? Now, to be fair, the game has kind of answered this question already, so I feel this is more a community debate than something the story is actively unpacking. Because when it comes to their actions, the Phraxodus has shown us nothing but evil. Let's break it down. In Jingzhou, they practically caused the lament. They created a way for Overthrax, the Threnodian of Jingzhou, to manifest and unleash chaos. If that does not scream evil, I do not know what does. Then in Renacita, they tried to destroy Reguna. During the carnival, they didn't just stir up trouble, they wreaked absolute havoc. Now, you could argue that their goal there wasn't just destruction, but to send a message, and fine. But the way they went about it, was still absurd. But it's in Septimonth where their darkness really shows. Firstly, there's what they did to Mia's body, which was already disturbing. But more importantly, one of their main objectives in Septimonth was to help the Threnodian recover its lost power. And we know Leviathan's goal, it is to engulf all of Renacita in a dark tide. That is not just morally questionable, that is end of the world level evil. So at this point, there's nothing about the Phraxodus that feels nuanced, no sign of a greater good, no hidden morality, just destruction, manipulation, and chaos. But still, the community insists there is more, that there is nuance, that maybe we'll understand them better later. And you know what, I'm willing to wait. Maybe as we see more members of the Phraxodus, we'll start to see the layers that people are talking about. But as of now, from what we've seen so far, the Phraxodus have done nothing but evil, plain and simple. And then there's the final secret I can think of, the biggest one in Wuthering Waves if you ask me. Who exactly is the Rover? From the very beginning, the game throws us into this classic gacha setup. The mysterious protagonist with no names, no memories, no past. So the question Wuthering Waves has been quietly pushing since day one is, who are we really playing as? And honestly, this is the most interesting question in the entire game. Every step we take seems to peel back another layer of the Rover's identity, and it's been one of the most satisfying reveals so far. Like in Huanglong when we met Jure, that moment was a game changer. We found out that the Rover isn't just some lost wanderer, they were the arbiter of Jure, and maybe even the arbiter of all the other sentinels. Even if not all of them, multiple sentinels clearly see the Rover as a godlike figure, someone they once followed, and that is huge. And that same pattern shows up again in Renacita, where Imperator also refers to the Rover as their arbiter. That kind of consistency across regions only deepens the mystery and the hype. But as cool as all that is, it also opens a bigger problem. So yeah, like I mentioned earlier, the Rover isn't just the arbiter of Jure, they're also the arbiter of Imperator, but those aren't the only titles they hold. The Rover is also said to be the ones who created the Black Shores. They're also called the First Resonator. And from everything we've learned so far, one thing is absolutely clear. The Rover is insanely powerful. In fact, I say they're too powerful. And that in itself is a problem. When your protagonist is this overpowered, it starts to break the story. Because as of now, there's not a single enemy we faced not a single boss or major threat that truly feels capable of defeating the Rover. Given who the Rover is supposed to be, nobody seems like a real challenge, and that kills tension. As powerful as Christophoro is, as intense as the Phraxodus might be, and even with the looming threat of the Threnodian, none of them feel like they could actually beat us. There's no real danger, and without that sense of danger, it's hard to stay fully invested in the stakes. Now, I don't know if this is intentional. Maybe Wuthering Waves is building towards a bigger threat, or maybe it is a misstep that they'll correct later, but either way, I think it's something they need to address. They need to show us that the world is bigger than just the Sentinels and the Threnodians, that there are greater powers out there, that there are enemies who can actually rival or even surpass the Rover. Because as amazing as it is to feel powerful, there comes a point where we crave challenge. We want to fear an enemy. We want to say, that one might be too much even for us. But right now, the Rover feels untouchable, and if that doesn't change soon, the story might risk losing its tension and its impact. So all in all, how has Wuthering Waves handled the secrets and stories it's shown us so far? I'd say it's done a pretty decent job. Not a perfect one, not even a great one, but decent. The foundations are there, the intrigue is strong, but there is a lot of room to improve. Personally, I want to see more focus on Abby, more clarity around the Phraxodus, and way more depth with the Rover. These are huge mysteries, and while we're getting more info about it, especially with the Phraxodus and the Rover, I just hope the game ties it all together in a way that actually makes sense. But still, I think the devs are on the right track. They've done a decent job so far in building the mystery, maintaining the hype, and slowly giving us more. I just hope they stick the landing. But hey, that's just what I think. Now it's your turn. Are there secrets I didn't mention that you think deserve more attention? Are there points you totally agree with, or maybe things you completely disagree on? Let me know in the comments. I really want to hear your thoughts. And as always, thanks for watching, and I'll catch you in the next one.